So it depends. The private guys, you build your own in a workshop. So we build a Renault Duster.
My son and so now I remember. So it's like oh, I'm seeing myself there. Oh, you look good, eh?
Do you look good?
I look very good. I look very good. If that's how I look very good. I don't want to lie to you. I look very good.
Yeah, because I was in Durban performing for them, and there was a car like that, so.
But he's still chaired.
Again?
Mic check.
Say more.
Mic check, mic check.
Okay,
Mic check.
bring it close. Are we good? Okay, bring it closer to you.
Mic check, 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's
Yeah,
it.
okay, yeah. Yako?
Mic check. Hello, hello.
Okay, Kelly?
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Are we good? That's it. Thank you.
8. Good evening and welcome to the meeting point on SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide. Thank you very much to Michael Abramson. He returns with SAFM Top Sport tomorrow between 7 and 8. Greg Host, appreciate you as always. He's got the latest news at 9. A special broadcast for this evening with South Africa exactly a week away from the general elections. Do you, as a voter, have a clear sense of what each of the political parties have to say in their respective election manifestos? In your reading, listening, and asking during this electioneering period, is there a party or parties that best represent issues that matter to you? One of the pillars of our democracy that I personally celebrate is the important work being done by civil society organizations in not only highlighting but driving solutions to some of the socioeconomic challenges confronting our country today. It only makes sense then that some of these organizations, because of the robust work that they do in their different communities, came together to look at political party manifestos and analyze their positions on issues ranging from but not limited to job creation, education, health, and gender-based violence. Now, through the people's analysis of political party manifestos, these organizations have brought back issues contained in manifestos back to where it matters, which is the people. The question really is, do political parties in their campaigning, their manifestos, their promises, speak to the needs and aspirations of South Africans? We have, on the meeting point throughout this election period, made a conscious decision to prioritize the voices of the people. It is therefore befitting that this evening we will hear the first critique by social movements of what political parties have put forward as solutions to the challenges South Africa is faced with. Between now and 10 p.m., 2-hour broadcast where we will be speaking to representatives from various civil society organizations to not only get their analysis of various political party manifestos, but most importantly, find out what more needs to be done post the 29th of May. The represented organizations this evening will include My Vote Counts, Equal Education, Dufunukwazi, Universal Basic Income Coalition, or UBIC, and the Alternative Information and Development Center, or AIDC. In the first hour, we'll focus on 3 core issues, that being GBV and femicide, jobs for all, as well as universal basic income grant and health issues. In the second hour, we look at equal and quality education, land and housing, ending load shedding, as well as the role of money in politics. This broadcast is live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. At any point, you're more than welcome to join the conversation. Send us your WhatsApp voice notes on 0614-104-107 or give us a call 086-000-2032. It is a meeting point on SAFM, 10 minutes past 8.
The African continent became a pioneer in being the first continent to focus on continental unity and to encourage nation building through unity and freedom from oppression. Africa Month is in celebration of this milestone of the OAU and its successor, the African Union. Africa Month on SAFM.
Stay on top of all meaningful, top trending stories right here on SAFM. Leading the conversation.
The meeting point on SAFM.
It is a meeting point on 104 to 107 nationwide, a special 2-hour broadcast looking at the people's analysis of political party manifestos. If you've just joined us, welcome. We've got a full show this evening, a number of civil society organizations that are going to be dealing with various issues that are not only contained in political party manifestos, but also our core issues that as a country, as a people, we deal with. A number of challenges that, of course, as South Africa, we are confronted with. Political parties during their campaigning promising a number of solutions to some of the challenges that we have. But what do we as the people have to say about the issues confronting the country? And through various civil society organizations, we've come to what we will be unpacking this evening, the people's analysis of political party manifestos. I want to welcome quite a panel. A reminder that we are live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. But I want to start off by welcoming Koketso Sachane from My Vote Counts. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Just to, if you give me a moment to correct you, I'm
Sipato. Oh, wait. Moloto is Bikanyo.
Yes.
Yeah, I just turned you guys into
One to person. It's okay. Astrologically, it's okay because she's a Libra and I'm an Aries and we're sister signs, so it's okay.
There you go. Kiamogetso Sipato from My Vote Counts. Bikanyo Moloto from My Vote Counts. Welcome. Jaco Olofsson from AIDC. Welcome, Jaco. And Kelly Housen from Universal Basic Income Coalition. I think maybe as a start, Nkamo is going to be with me throughout the broadcast,
Yeah.
both in the first hour and the second hour. But maybe as a start, Nkamo, the importance of the people's analysis of political manifestos. Why are we here and how did we get here?
A very deeply complicated question and very difficult to answer in a very short space of time. But the reason why we're here is that we're facing 30 years of democracy, and there's so many significant questions in relation to what we thought a democracy would be and what we want our democracy to look like. So I think this year is a pivotal moment for us to come together as people and start shaping the kind of democracy that we want. And this is why we're here, and this is one of the impetuses that gave us a drive to develop the people's analysis of manifestos.
Thank you very much. What we are going to do is, as mentioned, deal with 3 core issues within this hour, that being GBV and femicide, jobs for all, as well as universal basic income grant and health justice. The panel for this hour is Bikanyo Moloto from My Vote Counts, Jaco Olofsson from AIDC, as well as Kelly Housen from the Universal Basic Income Coalition. We're going to be giving each of you 5 minutes in speaking to the matters, of course, that you are focused on, that are contained within the people's analysis of political party manifestos. And maybe starting with you, Bikanyo, on the matter of ending GBV and femicide. What are political parties saying and what should we be concerned about?
Thank you, Koketso, and good evening to the listeners. Firstly, we are looking at the people's demands, so I'll focus primarily on that. And I think I just want to provide some context, considering that GBVF is a widespread issue that touches all facets of human life. I think I find it fitting that I'd be the first to speak. I think that when the rest of the panelists go on, it will provide much more insight, but also it is important for us to look at GBVF as something that helps us assess exactly where our democracy lies and where our political parties are in terms of looking at that, just looking at the impact that GBVF does have on society, right? Mm-hmm. So it should be an overarching theme throughout their own manifestos or throughout these different thematic areas that they are looking at, that they should be trying to address the challenge of GBVF. So long before COVID-19 came along, GBV was recognized as a global pandemic and one of the most systemic human rights violations, right? We signed a treaty by the UN General Assembly, which we signed in 1993 and ratified in 1995 with South Africa, right? Then came along the National Strategic Plan, right? South Africa had acknowledged GBV or GBVF as a crisis in 2018 and 2019 at the time, and we find ourselves adopting the National Strategic Plan on GBVF, which was drafted based on demands put forth by cis women, trans women, and gender non-conforming people, right? 400 representatives, organizations were involved in the drafting on that document that was adopted in 2020. So I would consider that the basis of the people's demands, right? That document really is comprehensive. It was drafted to provide a multi-sectoral, coherent, strategic, and policy and programming framework to ensure a coordinated national response. Having recognized that democracy is not just the work of the government, right? We as citizens also need to take part in the democracy, civil society as well, right? So it is meant to be a national framework where we are collaborating in these efforts, right? And it consists of 6 pillars, which we can go into detail later on. But in the foreword of that NSP document, the president says that it has been said that any true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable, which I find quite true. So to me, quite ultimately, this translates to the fact that in order to assess the quality of democracy in South Africa, we need to have a look at how the most vulnerable get to enjoy or not enjoy their human rights, right? So in order to assess also which political party to vote on, we need to see what they are thinking about the most vulnerable, whether they mention the most vulnerable at all in their manifestos, right? With the ANC, they speak about implementation of the NSP, which was drawn up. We saw that the Commission for Gender Equality did an assessment, a review for the first 2 years of NSP, right? In 2023, they released a report showing us that implementation was lacking. Some of the things that were, where there were constraints or resource constraints was because of the state, right? And we can see now, moving forward, the people that are pushing the most work with the NSP are civil society organizations. In fact, when you're sitting in those meetings, the most prominent state affiliated institution you will find is HSRC, right? But the ANC continues to say that they are going forward with implementing the NSP. Who exactly is implementing the NSP, right? When we look at the DA, they speak about the GBV, they touch on GBV, EFF touches on GBV, but they are not giving us concrete solutions. They are not giving us concrete frameworks. In fact, this could have been the easiest framework to use and say, this is what the people are saying, and this is what we'll ultimately do. If implementation has been lacking, how can we improve on implementation? South Africa is lauded for its progressive policies, but we've always failed at implementation. We've got the resources at hand. Why are political parties not using them? So for me, this NSP are the people's demands in terms of GBVF, and they should be following that. And right now, it is inadequate what they're saying. Thank you so much.
Wiga Nyomaloto from My Vote Counts, really appreciate it. If you've just tuned in, it is a meeting point on SFM, a special broadcast where we're looking at the people's analysis of political party manifestos, a number of issues that are important to us as South Africans, gender-based violence being one of them, and the need for us to remember what are the people's demands on a number of these issues that we'll be unpacking today, and how do political parties in turn respond or speak to what are the people's demands. We're going to take a quick break, and then we will come back with first introductions, at least, from Jaco Olofse from AIDC, speaking to the question of jobs. We also have with us on the panel Kelly Housen, who's from the Universal Basic Income Coalition. A reminder, this broadcast is live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. At any point, you can send us your WhatsApp voice notes on 0614-104-107. It is a meeting point on SFM, 19 minutes past 8.
Any person aggrieved by any political advertisement or political election broadcast that is broadcast by SAFM may lodge a complaint within 5 days from broadcast with the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, ICASA. To lodge your complaint, please contact ICASA's Compliance Department via telephone number on 012-568-3233. That's 012-568-3233. Or email broadcastingcompliance@icasa.org.za. That's broadcastingcompliance@icasa.org.za. Alternatively, complaintsccc@icasa.org.za. That's complaintsccc@icasa.org.za.
You and I know Casa Lager as a beer crafted from the finest homegrown ingredients, a beer that has stood the test of time and brought South Africans together, a beer that looks to the goodness within to create goodness around us. We have used the very same grains we brew to make Casa Lager, to make a bread that brings us together to face the next challenge and is helping to fuel a nation as it moves forward. Casa Lager is not just a beer, it's so much more. Visit casalager.co.za/bread.
Enjoy responsibly, not for persons under the age of 18.
Support Slipper Day on the 31st of May and help children like me fighting life-threatening illnesses to reach their dreams. Visit reachfordream.org.za and make a difference. And don't forget to step into your slippers on Slipper Day. Reach for a Dream, inspiring hope. This is an SABC-supported initiative.
Our country is moving in the wrong direction. We all know who is responsible. The uncaring leaders from old political parties who have run out of ideas. We need new leaders who come from our communities, care about us, listen to us, and unite us. These new accountable leaders are found at Rise Mzansi. We have a team of capable and caring leaders, fresh in politics but have deep experience. Our leaders do not make empty promises. They have a realistic plan to deliver a safe, prosperous, equal, and united South Africa in one generation. So Mzansi, join us on 29 May and rise to vote for new leaders. Vote Rise Mzansi.
This political party advertisement was paid for by the political party concerned. The views expressed in this advertisement are those of the political party and not those of the SABC.
The Meeting Point, Wednesdays and Thursdays, 8 to 10 p.m. Only on SAFM. Koketso Sachane on SAFM.
22 minutes past 8, it is the special broadcast of The Meeting Point this evening, where we're looking at the people's analysis of political party manifestos. And a panel that is with me looking at a range of issues. Just before the break, we heard from Wikanyo Moloto into what is very much a blight, a dark spot, if you will, on our society, that of gender-based violence and femicide. With us on the panel as well, Kelly Housen of Universal Basic Income Coalition will speak to that, but I would like to also welcome and give a few minutes to Jacob Olofsson from AIDC, speaking on the question of jobs.
Thank you so much. So if you look at kind of opinion polls, barometers of public feelings about what are the issues that are the most central around this election time, unemployment is coming in at #1, and it's not really very surprising because it's sitting at about 40% if you include those who are too discouraged to keep looking for work. It's the worst in the world, and it has been for a very long time. It's a catastrophic problem, and it is one of those issues that kind of bleeds into all other issues in society. So this should really, and we were hoping that this would be the jobs election, this would be the election of mass employment plans and mass employment strategies. So political parties in this election have responded to it, of course. Everyone has a section on jobs in the manifesto, but for the most part, this covers questions of skills training, framing the mass unemployment problem as a problem of people not having the right skills, there being a mismatch, or an infrastructure problem, and saying in kind of very general terms that we need to improve infrastructure, and this will lead to economic growth, which will lead to more jobs. And I would put most of the parties that would fall under the Moonshot Pact, so-called Moonshot Pact, under this category. But it's really the kind of basis of interventions around jobs. But our feeling is that this isn't really enough. This is firstly not that different from what has been the government policy for a long time. This is not something that is out of place in Operation Vulindlela, any government policy around jobs for the last few years. And we feel like this is a structural problem, and that point hasn't really been grasped adequately by a lot of parties in their proposals. It's something that lies within the kind of deeper economic structure, and just growth is not alone. Is not enough alone, apologies. Just yesterday there was an opinion piece by economist Duma Kobule, where he calculated that around 4% growth would be needed in order to just keep unemployment at the level that it is now. And we are currently at 0.6% growth. So it's not just growth, we also need job-creating growth. So there's three kind of broad strokes interventions that I think we would like to see that people have been saying would be extremely beneficial. And the first is that we think that in order to deal with the unemployment crisis, there needs to be real industrial policy. There needs to be a return in terms of planning, industrial policy planning, over a long period of time, with serious thought given to linkages in the economy, how this industrialization can be job creating, what opportunities there are, rather than this kind of policy that we've had in the past, which is kind of trying to plug into global markets, become competitive, and in the process, destroying parts of the manufacturing sector, and not really creating a connected economy that has its own dynamism, its own energy. So also one thing to say on this is that a lot of parties put forward proposals along these lines by talking about special economic zones, tax incentives, and the like, but these are tools that are used to achieve industrial policy. What we're not seeing in really any of the manifestos, some more than others, are the actual vision that these tools will be put to use in order to achieve. How will they be employed? There's a lot of focus just on the tools themselves. And the other point is around this policy of cutting state expenditure, of austerity in the public sector. In fact, a lot of parties have started talking about needing to slash public spending. But you see, when the state is investing in the economy, that is when there is economic growth, that is when there is job creation. When public services are allowed to collapse, that is when employment suffers, that is when economic growth in general suffers. And I know the question of funding will come up, but we can...
Yeah, it definitely will. Thank you very much, Jakob Olofse from AIDC. If you've just joined us, it is a meeting point on SAFM. We're looking at the people's analysis of political party manifestos and 3 core issues that we're dealing with in this hour. Our third panelist, Kelly Housen, is with the Universal Basic Income Coalition. Kelly, your few minutes of giving us a sense of the people's demands and what the various political parties are saying as compared to that?
Thank you so much. I wanted to congratulate My Vote Counts on the people's analysis. It shares a kind of common rationale and common objective with some work that UBIC has recently done in analysing different parties' policies in detail around the specific issue of social protection and social security. And what that work highlighted for us is really that this election is a pivotal moment of opportunity where the idea of a basic income, or call it comprehensive social security net, is very much on the table. It's on the agenda, and that's exciting because that sets South Africa apart from many other countries. I mean, I think that the debate on this issue is quite far advanced in South Africa. And so, you know, that's not to say that all political parties support the idea of a basic income, but just the fact that it is now so much kind of in the vernacular. And that's what we really saw in our analysis. And in terms of the people's demands, there's been research in the past couple of years that has shown that at least 60% of people support the idea of a basic income. So this is a popular demand. And political parties, or some political parties, really are responding to that democratic mandate. The issue is that the devil is in the detail. So it's not enough for a party to say, we support a basic income. Parties from across the spectrum have said that. And whilst we welcome that, it's not necessarily going to, as Jaco said, make a difference to the structural problem of poverty and inequality unless it's designed in a considered way that is based on the international evidence. So it must be set at an adequate value that enables people to meet their basic needs. It must be redistributive, so it can't take from the poor with one hand and give with the other. And if that is achieved, BIG can really have a cross-cutting impact on a number of issues in society. So it is very much the most direct and the most effective intervention that the state can make in hunger, which is arguably the most pressing challenge facing a large proportion of the South African population. But in doing so, in acting to address hunger first, there are enormous flow-on effects, benefits across areas like health, education, women's economic empowerment and autonomy, as well as employment. There's really good evidence that shows that providing people with their basic needs enables them to go out and participate more actively in the job market, but also it increases consumption in local communities, which stimulates local economies, particularly marginalised and depressed areas, to create jobs. And people also invest that income into businesses. So it's an economic stimulus, and it really all of the evidence points to the fact that addressing hunger, which is a moral, constitutional imperative, can also help to address our problem of a lack of inclusive economic growth.
Thank you very much, Kelly Housen from the Universal Basic Income Coalition. That concludes the introductory remarks, at least from our panelists. Again, a reminder, if you've just joined us, it is the meeting point on SAFM, a special broadcast where we're looking at the people's analysis of political party manifestos. There are the demands of the people, and then there is what political parties are saying they're going to do. Do the two meet? And I want to bring back Keamohezi Sipato from My Vote Counts. There's a common thread here. There is what Kelly spoke about in terms of the Universal Basic Income Grant and how it can be the most direct way in which the state can intervene. And we know that the most vulnerable are black people, but black women in particular. Earlier on, Wiganyo was speaking of how, if we look at the issue of gender-based violence and femicide, and how it is, of course, an indicator as to how the most vulnerable are treated, to quote the words of President Cyril Ramaphosa, and questioning whether or not these political parties are speaking to the most vulnerable. The common thread here, and something that we need to keep in mind when we're looking at the people's analysis of manifestos, the importance of that.
The common thread here is that the focal person that we're wanting to change their life is actually a black South African woman. And that's why we chose to start with the GBV topic. So having a conversation around dealing and ending gender-based violence and femicide, and also thinking about how do we create proper sustainable jobs, and then how do we then support those who are still trying to enter into the job market with a basic income grant is critical. The problem that we're facing in our democracy and overall in general is that policy interventions, ideas and solutions are designed and developed in silos without thinking about the human as a whole. And the idea and the importance of PAM is actually trying to flip the script in relation to this romanticization of political parties in our democracy. What's important in a democracy are the people. One of the biggest tenets of democracy in South Africa, well, the introduction of democracy in South Africa was around the people shall govern. And what we found through the process of the people's analysis of manifestos is that none of that actually takes precedence. So what we're seeing is that political parties will say what they think we want to say, but when we scratch the surface and we unpack the detail, you end up seeing that it doesn't necessarily meet what people want. So for us putting together PAM, the idea was to say, how do we contribute to shifting political discourse in South Africa? And we shift political discourse by centering the very people who are people in the country. We then say these are actually the solutions and ideas that people want. And how do we then compare them with the particular promises that political parties are making? After comparing that, the question then is, if a political party that's meant to serve the people is not aligned with the people, then what do the people do?
That is the question. And I struggle with this, to be honest, when we speak of whether political parties are speaking to the people and whether the people are included in formulating whatever it is that political parties say they're going to be doing. And I'm reminded of a report around the 2019 elections, a share of voice by Media Monitoring Africa, that speaks to who has a share of voice during an election period. And the large majority are political parties, politicians, and government. But then again, while there is the share of voice, then what are they saying? What are they speaking to? And what forms the basis of that which they're saying? Which reminds me of a quote that I heard that, if we are not at the table, then we are the meal, right? And that has stayed with me, and I'm hearing it resonate right now. And coming back to you, Wiganyo, in speaking to the question of gender-based violence, and you highlighted earlier on the failure and implementation of the NSP, but also again, if the most vulnerable are not at the table to discuss solutions, or if the solutions that are being presented are not in any way the solution, then what do we have?
So the NSP was drafted, the NSP was drafted in collaboration with 400 organizations, representatives and or organizations, right, with multiple stakeholders, multi-sectoral, cross-cutting. We only have that right now to say this is what the people are saying. We saw in a survey by Afrobarometer released in November 2023, where the people of South Africa answered the question of which is the most societal challenge that should be tackled right now, which is the most important, and they speak of GBV. Why? Because South Africans understand that GBV is cross-cutting, it is intersectoral, it hits us on all levels in every sphere of society. And so, for now, the political parties could say, but we didn't have time to do public participation. They could say that, right? It is possible. We are saying, here is a document that was formulated with the people. The people agreed to it. In fact, the people are doing majority of the pushing of the work, right? So why aren't you speaking to those things, right? With my research, on-the-ground research, having done work on violence against women in hotspots that are reported by crime stats, right, quarterly crime stats, hotspots in South Africa, across the nation, going to those hotspots and getting to SAPS, and they don't know who the GBV officer is. The Tutuzela care centers are closed. Some are open on a Tuesday because they only get a social worker on Tuesday. So there is an issue of implementation. There is an issue of resources, but we see the disbursement of funds. Where are they going? If people are unable, I've seen social workers who say, I have to cover 2 areas that have 35 villages, 35 and 45 villages each. One person.
If that's the case, and it's a very disturbing reality that you paint, right? And going back to the analysis of the political party manifestos, and I know that you said earlier on that none of them speak to this. Is there anyone that comes close to addressing those issues? Surely there's hope somewhere.
So they speak to training of officers, which is already spoken to in the NSP. They speak to sensitization of officers, which is already spoken to in the NSP, right? We have an issue of implementation. Tell us how you're going to sensitize those police officers who turn around a queer person and say, abafazi, and turn you around, and you cannot do anything about it. When there's a whole framework in place where funds are being dispersed and people are supposed to be going for training, right? I've spoken to members of SAPS when I was doing my research, where they say they have a capacity issue, right? They have a training issue. They would ask for training from civil society and say, we need you guys to come because we don't know how to do this work. And you would wonder why that is when there's a whole NSP framework with a budget attached to it and funds have been dispersed.
Wiganyo Mloto is one of our panelists from My Vote Count, speaking to the question of gender-based violence and femicide as we continue to look through the people's analysis of political party manifestos. There is a statistic, not even a stat, but a comment that Yako spoke to earlier on that left me disturbed and concerned. And we will, after the break, just come back to what you said about how we need 4% growth to keep the unemployment past couple of months campaigning for our vote. And the question really is, do they speak to, and the promises that they have, that which is contained in their manifestos, do they speak directly to the needs of the people? What are people's demands versus what political parties are saying they're doing? Still with us on the panel, Jaco Olofse from AIDC. On the question of jobs, Jaco, earlier on you mentioned, I think it was it Mondli that you quoted?
Duma
it was that you quoted, that the country needs 4% growth in order for us to keep the unemployment rate where it is.
That's right.
That paints a very horrifying picture. If we go with what Duma is saying, and we believe him, it paints a horrifying picture as to how far we are not. What are political parties saying in relation to economic growth and, in turn, job creation?
Yeah, so, I mean, that's a good question, because it's really, in going through the manifestos, it's quite surprising the lack of detail that is in really almost all political party manifestos, and the lack of creative thinking. Like I said in the introduction, a lot of what we're seeing is a kind of recycling of, or repackaging of what has been ANC policy, unsuccessful policy on top of that. Parties like the Democratic Alliance have this focus on cutting red tape. I put parties like Action SA also in this category, of creating growth and employment through cutting red tape, reducing government spending, creating kind of room for more private sector spending, making it easier to hire and fire, and freezing the national minimum wage, which in real terms amounts to a cut every year of about 5% or so. There are parties that I think have some good proposals in relation to economic growth through industrial development, through localization. The EFF has some good proposals around that, but it's kind of difficult to pick through the EFF manifesto for what will be implemented, given how much there is in there. Also, Mkhonto Sizwe has some good proposals around industrialization, localization too, but there the problem is it's being coupled with taking away of institutions like the judiciary that ensure accountability, because a problem with or risk that you face in a kind of planned industrialization strategy is that it becomes a vessel for accumulation by a certain group of people within the state who have control over those resources. So I would say those are kind of the two camps really that I've put parties in, is a kind of a push towards more privatization, deregulation, and creating growth through that. And then on the other side, kind of gesturing in the direction of industrial development, localization, some kind of protectionism, labor-intensive work, and mass employment programs, which are important, but where there's also strong concerns around implementation and the likelihood of those policies being implemented. Yeah.
You're more than welcome at any point to join the conversation via the WhatsApp line. You can send us your voice notes or text 0614-104-107, or give us a call 086-000-2032 as we continue to look at the people's analysis of political party manifestos exactly 1 week away from us going to the polls. Kelly Housen from Universal Basic Income Coalition still with us. Kelly, there's something that you mentioned earlier on, similar to what Jaco spoke to, which is that it seems everybody speaks to universal basic income grant, but we come back to the question of there not being detail in how. Are we being fair in expecting detail in these manifestos, or should we elevate our expectations?
I think ultimately it's, as I said, the devil is in the detail. It's the detail that is going to factor into potential coalition negotiations after the election. It's the detail that can be used to hold parties accountable to their commitments after the election. So I don't think it's too much to expect parties to produce a plan and to say how they're going to implement a policy that they've adopted. Otherwise it really is empty rhetoric. It really is an empty gesture. And when it comes to basic income grant, I'm, kind of encouraged to see that there are some parties who have really thought through the detail and have thought through the detail in terms of when and how it would be introduced, how it would be progressively realised, what factors would influence the decision about what value it would be set at, and how the value would increase for inflation so that it didn't fall behind the cost of living. And that is reflected in our scorecard. But I think to the broader question of are parties responding to the people and what people want, we also, in the process of producing the scorecard, picked up on, perhaps a slightly more negative trend, which is that I think a lot of manifestos are speaking to the people, but in a cynical way, speaking to people's sense of fear, disillusionment, frustration, and maybe a kind of an alienation from the democratic process. Especially looking at the issue of poverty and social grants, we are constantly fighting some very pervasive myths and narratives around people who have found themselves in food poverty as being lazy, unwilling to make a change in their lives, unwilling to go out and find a job. And we have seen a lot of political parties, I think, speaking to that sentiment. And there was some interesting research done in South Africa on grants that showed that when people received a grant for themselves, they said, of course I won't stop working, of course I won't stop contributing to the community. But when other people in the community received a grant, those same people said, it's going to make them lazy. So it's this kind of outward thing that we project onto others. Political parties really are using that to, I think, advance this rhetoric of individualism. We all just need to be better. We all just need to do a better job of not being poor. And that enables them to sidestep the broader structural issues, the historical realities of inequality and poverty in this country.
Your calls on 086 000 2032 and also your WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107. We do have a voice note and a call that we will get to. And I want to come back to you, Kiamo. Of course, Koketso Sachane is with My Vote Counts. The struggle that I have, and to touch on what Kelly was speaking to, is the fact that, of course, there is no detail, and also the use of fear, right? So could it be that as a country, 30 years of democracy, that political parties have been able to get away with purely rhetoric, and maybe possibly because of the type of challenges that we have, the detail is required, and maybe they themselves do not have the detail as to how, which would be alarming. But how do we balance that? A history of rhetoric, a history of sloganeering that leads to a political party being elected versus the reality that we confronted with in 2024, where the detail as to how we're going to get out of this reality actually matters.
I think I want to start with maybe moving us away a little bit from doom and gloom. I think a few weeks ago, I was in a closed meeting, and a leading academic said something which really struck me, which was basically what's happening right now is democracy consolidating itself. So whatever we're seeing in our political system at this very moment is not some weird anomaly somewhere. It's not this funny thing that is only plaguing the republic. It's what democracy does. So that means then it's pushing us to say a particular kind of political system worked between 1994 and now. That particular kind of political system is not going to work for South Africa going forward. Once we accept that, then we can move beyond the fear and accept the fact that We are being called to dream and work together to bring that dream to fruition. So political parties have been able to run around with rhetoric the whole time, because before 1994, mobilizing and organizing was around sharing with people, hey, asambe so vote, so fagi ANC. Now the conversation is completely different. We're not asking anymore for a seat at the table. We now need to discuss what kind of table it is. Do we even want a table? The challenge that we're facing is that many South Africans have been denied the opportunity to collectively contribute to thinking about shaping the new South Africa that we're wanting to bring in. And what's happening is that we've lost the notion of these are public representatives. I say, as a person in South Africa, I don't have the minutes to be in Parliament. You go be in Parliament, you go represent me and do the things that I need as a citizen. We've lost that. Let's bring that back, because once we bring that back into popular consciousness, we can then think about how do we hold these representatives accountable, and how do we then challenge rhetoric and political electioneering.
I appreciate what you're saying, because two things can exist at the same time, where there is concern around where we are as a country, while also celebrating that because it presents us with a new avenue as to how things can be. Definitely. And what we will also do in the next hour is look at post the 29th of May, in staying with that, maturing democracy and the people being at the center, what role do the people play and demand when it comes to holding those that will be elected to account. We take a quick break. I see you, Mazwi, will take your call and your WhatsApp voice notes as well. It is the meeting point on SAFM, 7 minutes to 9.
SAFM supports a litter-free South Africa. Play your part in keeping our surroundings and environment clean. SAFM, leading the conversation. Koketso Sachane on SAFM.
We are on the home stretch of the first hour of the People's Analysis of Political Party Manifestos. We've heard from Wikanyo Moloto of My Vote Counts, Jaco Olofsen of AIDC, as well as Kelly Housen of the Universal Basic Income Coalition. And with me also continuing into the next hour, Kemohezu Sipato of My Vote Counts. Mazwi, calling in from Valco. Mazwi, thank you very much for your call. Good evening.
Good evening, Koketso.
Good evening, Tata. Go ahead.
Koketso. Koketso.
Please go ahead, Mazwi.
Yes, I'm glad we are discussing political manifesto today. It's a very interesting, that is very close to my heart topic, right? You see, Koketso, in the past, in South Africa, our people have voted particular political parties. Yet 3 months down the line, they would ban tires against them. You see? Now, I think it's very important that the discussion about political manifestos should be cascaded down to lower ranks of society, where every eligible voter is very conscious that the party I choose when I go to the ballot is not a party I follow religiously, but is a party that I'm confident it will bring the change that I'm looking for. Thank you, Koketso.
Appreciate you, Babu Mazwi. Thank you very much. We have one voice note, 0614-104-107.
Hi there, how's it? There's absolutely nothing wrong with Oranje. Look at it as a family perspective. When you want to create a better world and a better environment for your family, you go into you buy new property, or you move out of the neighborhood, or you will go look for some sort of security. Why is people finding a problem with that is people that doesn't have a problem with us as the neighbors, neither do we disturb them. Why do we disturb it? It's like your neighbor bought a new car, now you're angry at him, now you also want a new car. And if you can't get a new car, you become chaotic. That is wrong. This is what we need to teach our children. If something doesn't work for you, move along and create something that will work for you. There is absolutely nothing wrong with change. Why don't we focus on fixing South Africa than we worried about Oranje? That people doesn't ask us nothing, neither do they disturb us. Leave the people at peace, leave Oranje. That is a good example of a clean state. That is a good example of a whole city or province or country or whatever you call it, land that is at peace. That is what we need.
Thank you very much for that. I don't know, Bikanyo, was it you who mentioned Oranje? I'm not.
I know my accent is not that great, but
and maybe when we speak to John later on from Dufunukwazi, we can speak to the question of land and Oranje. But in conclusion, at least for this first part, I'm going to just give you all just a few seconds on this, and I'm going to start with yourself, Kelly. Again, we are going into elections where somebody or a collective are going to emerge victorious. And coming back to the question of a universal basic income grant, how do we as a people hold whomever to account?
Yeah, look, I think,
very briefly.
Sure. I think on the point about people not trusting manifesto promises. Look, the problem with that is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. A lot of the response we've had to our analysis is saying, well, manifesto commitments mean nothing, so why should we care? If you say that, that's going to be the case, you know? So I think that in order to hold political parties to account for their commitments, we need to be having this conversation. We need to be keeping the receipts and remembering the commitments and, you know, banging on about them after the election.
All right, thank you very much. Jaco, for yourself, I suppose accountability is important, continuing the conversation is important, but the question of jobs, in a lot of ways, is what's going to determine the future of the country.
Yeah, exactly. On the point of accountability, I think we really need to also try and develop a kind of a culture of public debate around these issues, even if they are sometimes quite technical, but we need to be debating politicians, we need to be asking politicians in public about their promises with relation to the economy, with relation to jobs, and why these promises have not been fulfilled, and starting to debate about what alternatives are there, what creative and bold alternatives are there for South Africa, and pressuring politicians to start talking about these, because they're currently absent from the conversation.
All right, Biganyo, final word from you?
Final word from me is to say that just speaking to the people, I know a lot of the times the question that has come up in these past few weeks is, how do I decide on a political party? And I would leave you with these words. You, as a vulnerable or marginalized person who's majority in the country, if any of their promises or policies do not speak to you, they're supposed to speak to you. You are supposed to be the overarching theme. They don't speak to you, then you shouldn't be voting for them. But if they do, then you should be considering them.
Thank you very much, Biganyo Moloi. Jaco Olofse, Kelly Housen, thank you very much for this. In the next hour, we look at equal and quality education, land and housing, ending load shedding, and the role of money in politics. It's 9 o'clock time for the latest news with Greg Hose.
Thank you. AfriForum moves ahead with Mbalula. Unit spokesperson.
On a cursory inspection of the available evidence, it is very clear that there's a strong case against Fikile and Balula, but it goes even further. We say there are at least another 4 suspects who should be prosecuted as part of this whole trip to Dubai and how it was funded. Our next step, there are some gaps in the record that was provided to us. It could well be simply oversight, so we're going to further engage with the SAPS to ensure we get those documents.
Access to Gaza, prohibiting the effective preservation and retention of evidence of potential war crimes.
When services by waste management entity Pick It Up will resume, with piles of rubbish attracting rats. Casual workers at Pick It Up have been striking over demands that their posts be made permanent. Here are the views of some Joburg residents.
Well, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that the trash is still being left on the There's trash being left on the road. It's
Bins are standing in the street. They can be used to commit crime. It's easy to move the bin to a wall, no matter how high the wall is, and you can jump over the wall.
The Police Minister, Becket Cele, has called on community structures in Soshanguve, north of Pretoria, to help officers in fighting crime. He was addressing the community following a protest march led by the ANC Youth League.
On them, bricklayer and all, but other base of problems here, you say Winterfeld, where there is a lot of criminality.
In election news, the African Restoration Alliance says it's banking on 1 million South Africans voting for it in next week's elections. Alliance leader Jerome Swartz was addressing party members and supporters at Heidedal in the Free State.
If jobs are available and you do not want to work, you must actually be imprisoned. And when you're in prison, then look after the needs of your family while being incarcerated. Because the problem is that people are not, they want jobs. Some people are not serious about jobs, and there are really people that are looking for jobs. And those that are looking for jobs do not have access to jobs. And so the biggest issue in South Africa is not really, yes, we've got housing issues in certain provinces, but the issue really is jobs. If you can deal with jobs, you can deal with crime. Less crime. More people working, less crime.
The top story, AfriForum says, has taken a significant step towards privately prosecuting the ANC Secretary-General on charges of corruption related to his family holiday to Dubai in 2016. That's SAFM News. I'm Greg Close.
The Meeting Point, Wednesdays and Thursdays, 8 to 10 p.m. Only on SAFM. Koketso Sachane on SAFM.
Are you okay?
It is 6 minutes past 9. We're in the second hour of the meeting point on SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide. If you've just joined us, welcome. It's a special broadcast of the meeting point where we're looking at the people's analysis of political party manifestos. With a week away from the national elections, having listened to and experienced the electioneering buzz, if you will, and a number of promises that political parties have made through their manifestos, the question is, what are the people's demands? And through various civil society organizations, they've gone through and looked at political party manifestos, and based on their constituency, the people that they work with represent, that are acting for, comparing the people's demands to the various political party manifestos. In the previous hour, we looked at issues of gender-based violence and femicide, jobs, as well as universal basic income grant and health justice. In this hour, our focus is on equal and quality education, land and housing, ending load shedding, and the question of the role of money in politics. With me, at least for this hour, Nongeto Madubedube is from Equal Education, John T. Koga is from Dufunukwazi, Andile Zulu from AIDC, Robin Pensy is from My Vote Counts, and still with us, Kamohezi Sipato. We're going to take a break and then go very much into this very busy hour of dealing with these extremely important matters. It is a meeting point on SAFM, 8 minutes past 9.
If you're active on social media and love SAFM, we hope you'll take a moment to like or follow our SAFM page on Facebook and Twitter. These are the best places to find all the guest information, conversations, and stories you love from your favorite presenters, along with regular updates from SABC News. And don't forget, you can send your questions to feedback@safm.co.za. SAFM, leading the conversation. The meeting point on SAFM.
104 to 107 nationwide in the second and final hour of this special broadcast, the people's analysis of political party manifestos. You're welcome at any point to be part of the conversation. You can send us your WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107 or give us a call 086 000 2032. The focus in this hour, equal and quality education, land and housing, ending load shedding, and the role of money in politics. I want to, in welcoming our guests, and as we did in the previous hour, allowing each of our guests a few minutes to give their, at least, take on what is contained within the political party or the people's analysis of political party manifestos around their issues. Starting with yourself, Robin Pansy from My Vote Counts. The question of money in politics?
I think the question of money in politics really is something that undergirds the conversation that we are having here today. And I think I'd also like to take a moment just to highlight the fact that this conversation has a lot of women and women of color in particular participating in this conversation. And I highlight this because the issues that are being tabled here today are in fact intersectional, and the lens in which we are looking at this is from an intersectional, interconnected point of view. And in practical terms, my input is talking about the mechanism by which that interconnectedness actually happens, and that is money in politics. I'm sure if we talk to sort of anybody on the street, they're not really saying, money, 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 this is what I want my politician to talk to. But what Pam is really centered on is the demands of people and agenda setting. And where money comes in is how do we actually determine what is on the agenda, and in fact, what is the order of importance on that agenda in the first place. And we'll continue to have the conversation with the other panelists about what that actually is. But I want to give a very concrete example about sort of the money flows that we are seeing. So last week, Friday, we had the IEC release quarterly disclosures. So these are disclosures about private funding, so individuals giving money to political parties. And in this quarter, 172 million rand was declared by some 13 political parties, right? The highest quarter we've had for funding so far. Of that, only 5 individuals accounted for 70% of that. In other words, 120 million rand only came from 5 individuals. And I'm sure these are some names that you may have heard of before. So we had your Oppenheimers, 2 members of the Oppenheimer family donated, Patrice Motsepe donated, the co-founder of Capitec, Michal Leroux donated, and Martin Moschel as well. And what they actually represent is a trend that we've seen in our politics, is that our political parties depend on these individuals heavily. If they were to withdraw their funds from these political parties, they would have little to nothing actually left over. Now, if the conversation today is around implementation, the practicalities of taking the demands we are trying to center today and have this being given effect to, if your biggest funders represent their own interests, represent their own businesses, where does that actually put you as the ordinary member of the public, an ordinary citizen? If I, for example, were to give 100 rand to a political party, but I'm up against a donation that's 10 million rand, we would like to believe that these two things mean the same thing, they're weighted the same. But can we actually say that practically? If I, as a political party, know that every quarter I can depend on you to give me 10 million rand through your business or as an individual, what is the likelihood that my decision-making is skewed in the direction of your interests? And I think this is really what we want to keep in mind when we have this conversation around money in politics. And I just want to sort of draw my comments to a close here by also saying that, again, picking up from what Bukanyo had said earlier with regards to implementation, we should also keep in mind that political parties don't just receive private donations. They also receive public money. So all your represented political parties receive public money. Over the past few years, if we total all the money given to political parties, it's actually over R1 billion. So it's $1 billion industry to participate in South African politics. So if we hear what Bukanyo is talking about, if you are a black woman living in this country, what is the likelihood that you may be the victim of GBV? I'm entering into a police station. I expect to be treated with a certain level of respect and have justice delivered to me. Money is spent for that purpose, but I don't receive that. For political party funding, you receive money for your constituencies to have offices where you can be a forward, front-facing representative to your people in the communities. Lots of money, hundreds of millions get spent on that. How many people actually have functioning constituency offices in their neighborhoods? So I think this is where I'd sort of like to leave my comments around how are we seeing using money, and in what ways does that dictate the political conversation?
Robin Pasensi there from My Vote Counts, thank you very much. The whole question of the role of money in politics, the influence on policy, the influence on manifestos, which then brings me to you, Andile Zulu from AIDC, and speaking to the question of ending load shedding. Because there's been, again, a debate around how do we deal with the energy crisis in the country, and the role of, whether it's political parties, government, and even private sector, money, when it comes to the solutions to the energy crisis that we have. In going back to the demands of the people versus what is contained in political party manifestos, what have we found through the work that you've done that is contained in PAM?
So load shedding stands obviously at the forefront at this election. It's been going on for the past 15 years. It impedes economic growth, it destroys small businesses, it makes things unsafe for women in communities, and so on. But what's been quite disappointing to see is that most political parties, in fact, support what we call unbundling, which is where you would take apart Eskom's 3 components, being generation, transmission, and distribution, in order then to allow private actors to enter into the electricity sector and create a free and competitive electricity market. Now, that solution doesn't actually deal with what's wrong with Eskom fundamentally. Yes, there is the reality of corruption taking away Eskom's resources and undermining its operations. But what we found more fundamentally is that Eskom has a contradiction that's been around since the 2000s, which is that it's a state-owned utility, but it has a corporate mandate. So it must provide a universal good, being electricity, but it must do this while functioning like a private company in a country where most people are poor and unemployed. So what has this meant practically for Eskom? It means, for example, that Eskom has always tried to recover the costs of its operations by selling electricity to us as end users, being you and I. How you expect to get a profit and revenue from selling to a population that's mostly poor and unemployed is beyond me. So then that means that Eskom has less revenue, historically, to be able to do infrastructure maintenance, to build new infrastructure, and improve its ability to generate electricity. So then what does Eskom do alternatively? Because again, it's being treated like a private business. They take out loans. For example, in 2023, Eskom had debts of 400 billion rand. In 2010, they took out a loan of $3.75 billion to build 2 power stations that are yet to be complete. So what this means is that Eskom then is losing revenue because people can't afford its electricity, but then it's spending a lot of its money as well on servicing debt and paying interest on these exorbitant kinds of loans. And so what they do, instead of getting public financing, is raise tariffs. Tariffs from 2007 up until 2019 have gone up by 333%. Most South Africans cannot afford Eskom's tariff, and it only leads to more people disconnecting and seeking alternative ways of getting electricity, which means then that Eskom now has less market share and less revenue to be able to do maintenance and fix its power stations. Then you have all these input costs that Eskom has, because again, it's being treated like a private company. These are input costs that could be regulated. These are exorbitant coal contracts. These are expensive contracts for outsourcing. These are predatory contracts with independent power producers through what we call power purchase agreements. These are kinds of contracts and input costs that the government could regulate if they treated Eskom as a public utility that must first and foremost serve a public good of delivering electricity. So in terms of what the people want, and of course we then have the crisis of climate change as well, in the fact that Eskom must shift to renewable energy, but through things such as the Just Energy Transition Partnership, we have outsourced our just transition to multinational corporations and international finance institutions like the World Bank that aren't really looking to help us solve climate change, but rather looking for a new way to make money and accumulate. But fundamentally, what people want is to say, decorporatize Eskom. Stop treating it like a private company. It must function as a utility with a mandate to deliver electricity as a public good, and this means that it must be financially supported and subsidized through taxes on the wealthy and the rich, and not through tariffs on the poor and the working class. Secondly, we say that you have to provide Eskom with the funding to fix its power stations, to conduct maintenance, and to build publicly owned renewable energy. You can't outsource renewable energy completely to the private sector. There's many risks and costs associated with that. But then also cut the costs of Eskom. Why must Eskom continue taking out foreign loans? What we found from the movements and partners we deal with is that they say, stop Eskom from taking foreign loans on the market. It just means more debt and more interest rate payments. That World Bank loan from 2010, we still haven't paid off. It's going to take us until the end of the century to be able to pay off that loan, considering transfer costs and interest rates and so on. We also then say, fix the basic electricity program, because there's 10 million South African households that don't have a safe, affordable, and reliable access to electricity. And it's partly because of how the program is financed and issues in municipality, and the free basic electricity that people receive is only 50 kilowatts per month. That is not enough to be able to run a household where children are taken care of, where people can meet their needs, raise it to 350 kilowatts. And then again, implement a progressive tax system to be able to start funding these kinds of things. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andy Lezulu from AIDC. If you've just tuned in, it is the meeting point on SAFM. We're looking at the people's analysis of political party manifestos and the different voices that you're hearing from different civil society organizations here, not only to speak to what one finds in political party manifestos, but also highlighting the voices of the people. The insights that are being shared today come from the work that they do on a daily in understanding what the demands are and comparing the demands to what the political parties are saying. Our next panelist, Nongedo Madubedube from Equal Education. Hey, I'm going to choke on this one. Equal Education.
We come in peace.
We come in peace, yeah. But on a serious note, I mean, I know and I remember the work done by yourselves as Equal Education on a number of issues, particularly on minimum norms and standards. I remember where you had to take the Minister of Basic Education to court when it came to that particular matter. On that, and of course many other issues that you as Equal Education have done research on and work around, what are the demands of the people versus what political parties are saying as a start on the question of minimum norms and standards?
Yeah. So the first thing that I wanted to ask people to do, folks that are listening and watching, is to please go on Equal Education's social media pages and or the Equal Education law centers. And we're going to read a story together in my short input. So we've got an analysis of the manifestos of the people vying for political power in this election up there. And what we've done there is shown you what the different issues that our own members, we are the only youth-led social movement in South Africa that compromises primarily of secondary school learners. So learners themselves in these schools have crafted a set of demands that would make education equal and of quality for them in their lifetime. So we've taken those issues and we've put them up, put them up against what political parties are promising, and so we've got this analysis of manifestos from an education lens. No? So go have a look at that and we'll follow the story together. Before I talk about what some of these campaigns that have come out of EER, and I'm sure a lot of people have some knowledge, I want to talk about some of the trends in the manifestos that we're seeing. The first thing, so maybe 3 conditions, just to organize my thoughts, is that we have got an overwhelming amount, and we must say this because this is the political landscape, an overwhelming amount of right-wing populist parties vying for power in this election. It is a scary time inside democratic South Africa. While I agree with Ukiya that democracy is consolidating itself, we don't necessarily have the most progressive people that are asking for our votes, which means that I am encouraging young people and parents that will be voting on behalf of these learners that were outside Parliament on the 10th of May to please think very carefully and consciously and be very stingy with their vote in this next election, even if you're hoping to run a strategic vote. Now, these right-wing populist parties are doing a couple of things. I said 3 things to organize my thoughts. The one is that there's no real mention of an inclusive education system in our futures. So a lot of these political parties are suggesting that learners with learning barriers, whether it's physical or cognitive, should be put in schools that are outside of the system. Okay? And that infringes on the rights of children, especially those that are most marginalized inside of the system. It also starts to propose something that even today government is struggling to run. Special schools in South Africa are in dire straits, even worse than your quintile 1 to 3 schools, which are typically no fee paying. It's unviable and it's unconstitutional. The second thing that these parties are in the majority promoting here is the introduction of coupons, voucher systems, and private actors in our education system. If you track democracies across the world that are struggling at the moment, and I think South Africa is 5 foot there, you'll find that private actors start to insert themselves into the system. I mean, Andile just spoke about what's happening in the energy space. Insert themselves into the system. They want to do away with regulations. I mean, you've got a government that is unwilling, has no political power to protect people. They enter into contractual agreements and unregulated agreements with these private actors and let them do as they wish with the public good. We've seen in the Western Cape the absolute collapse and the destroying of generations of young folk in the most marginalized peri-urban communities because the Western Cape Department of Education has introduced something called collaboration and donor-funded schools, the equivalent of charter schools in South Africa, in democratic South Africa. And learners at Equal Education have spent the last couple of years saying to this government, no, regulate these interventions. So a lot of them are trying to introduce these. No? The third, hopefully you'll come back to me again because it's, there's quite a bit of stuff in here. The third is that there are anti-LGBTI sentiments in these manifestos. Political parties are working to scrap all rights of gender expression and sexual identity inside schools. I don't have to tell you which those parties are. And so we are concerned about the safety, the dignity, the emergent rights of children, teachers, and schooling staff. In fact, the whole school community, just of those three conditions. I'm nearly done, I promise you. You said to me, what are the demands then of children and people in the schooling system at the moment? One of the things that I just want to raise is that 1 out of 3 children in South Africa is not attending an ECD program today. So one of the massive challenges is that 1 in 4 children then are stagnated by the time they are age 4. If potentially able to grow, no cooler, is affected by the fact that the state is not making available a public good to children at that very age. And in the majority, because someone had said, yeah, we're talking about black women, I'm talking now about black children as the most marginalized and unprotected people inside of our societies. And we repeatedly said to Angie Motshekga, you must be careful now, because while you are refusing accountability and or the politicians in the Western Cape, I mean, they changed, so I can't say a name out now, David Miller, Mayor. When we talk to those homies and we say to them, you are affecting generations of black youth by a lack of political will. These are the kinds of things that we're pointing to.
Okay.
81% of children can't read for meaning in South Africa.
Yeah,
they cannot comprehend text.
I'm going to ask you to pause there, Nongado. Thank you, because we are going to come back to this. I want to give an opportunity to John Dikoga from Difunukwazi as well to speak to the question of land and housing. The early hours of this morning, I ended up at a protest on Voortrekker Road in Cape Town, where there were residents of Gate 7 next to Kensington who were protesting. Essentially, this is a community that has been alongside the side of the Voortrekker Road for the past 30 years. And they have 3 core demands: electricity, water, and housing. And they decided, in raising their voice, to blockade parts of the Voortrekker Road in Cape Town. And in being amongst them, in listening, one is reminded that this is but a microcosm of the larger issue of land in our country. So what do political parties say? And also, whether it's the people of Gate 7 and others that you've spoken to, what are the people's demands when it comes to the question of land and housing?
Yes, and I mean, so housing is a springboard for a host of other, or access to other rights. And so if you don't have adequate housing, if you don't have a stable and secure home, your kids are not safe. You know, you don't have access to electricity, and so on and so on. So the legitimate needs of those Voortrekker Road residents is, as you say, a microcosm of a profound crisis that is, that continues to plague South Africa, and it has its roots in colonial and apartheid spatial planning. It's not just housing. The ANC government has produced housing en masse in peripheral, far-flung locations, and their manifesto continues to punt that line, but it's housing in a well-located area that actively, can I say aggressively, redistributes and redresses the legacy of spatial apartheid. That means looking at the best well-located areas, places where there's good schools, good access to social amenities, healthcare. As I said, a springboard to access to other socioeconomic rights that can have a profound impact on families' lives. And so, what political parties are saying about that is that it's not just housing. It's it's housing, and the housing market is a complex thing to regulate. You can't just go from one spectrum of let's just protect property, like the DA is saying, because if you just property, you have to look at the statistics and demographics of who owns property and what that's going to do to entrench racial and class-based segregation. But then you can't jump to the other end and say, let's not recognize property at all, because let's completely get rid of it, because it's a tentative balancing act. And I think that's what's interesting about regulating the private sector. You can't just look at state-led public housing, because the majority of housing is actually private-led. So what you need is political parties who have an active and profound understanding of private markets in order to play an active role in regulating that for a social good. And so it's a balancing act between land for profits and land for people. And interestingly, the EFF has probably the most interesting manifesto position on spatial redistribution. They're calling for social housing restructuring zones in previously white areas that promote integration and social cohesion. Is that not exactly what we need? But the difficulty with that is that in order to do that, you have to, unfortunately, be very sensitive to property markets and the way that we are still, 30 years into democracy, still hamstrung by capitalism. It's a reality.
Johnny Koga from Ndifunu Kwazi. It is a meeting point on SFM if you've just joined us. We are well into, this moved very quickly, the last half hour of the 2-hour broadcast, special broadcast on the people's analysis of political party manifestos. In this hour, we heard from Johnny Koga from Ndifunu Kwazi. There's also Noncedo Madube from Equal Education, Andile Zulu from AIDC, as well as Robin Pasensi from My Vote Counts. Our core issues around equal and quality education, land and housing, ending load shedding, and the role of money in politics. After the break, I'm seeing, Kamo, and we'll get to this, another thread, whether it is across these 4 areas that we've covered, but also you know, in the previous hour, what we dealt with, that intersectionality that Robin was speaking to. We'll take a break and get to that common thread, and not losing sight of the fact that before you run out of time, we have to talk about the responsibility that we have as citizens post the 29th of May. 26 minutes to 10. It is a meeting point on SAFM.
With misinformation and disinformation around us all the time, where can we turn to for news and information that is not fake? Radio, of course, your #1 trusted source of reliable and truthful news and information. For over 3 decades, we have been a signatory to the BCCSA Broadcasting Code of Conduct, and we pride ourselves as a trusted source of information. Say no to false news and disinformation that circulates online. Radio, keeping it real and fighting fake since day one. A message from the National Association of Broadcasters.
The Meeting Point, Wednesdays and Thursdays, 8 to 10 p.m. Only on SAFM. Koketso Sachane on SAFM.
We're in the last half hour of the meeting point and concluding on the home stretch and concluding this people's analysis of political party manifestos. In this hour, focusing on money in politics, ending load shedding, land and housing, as well as equal and quality education. Also still with us, Koketso Sachane from My Vote Counts. Kamo, I want to go back to what I said earlier on, because again, in highlighting this common thread, right? I spoke of going to this place in the early hours of this morning, Gate 7 outside of Maitland Cemetery, residents there, community that has grown over the years, but effectively been there for the past 30 years. Core demands around housing, around electricity, and also around water. And in drawing the common thread, there is a land question that John T. was speaking to, land and housing. But also when you talk about land and housing, there's a question of education. That community, do the kids in that community have access to education, where people end up being housed before we talk about the quality of housing and whether it's just housing or it's actually a proper human settlement with all that is needed, the impact that it has on the education, and then access to electricity, to go back to what Andile was speaking about, and the affordability or not of education. And then staying with that example, one hearing, speaking to the residents outside of Gate 7, that part of the issue has to do with some entity that owns the land, right? To come back to the question of money in politics, right? Robin, the role of money in influencing how any of these issues are dealt with. Again, and you can link that up to what we discussed in the previous hour around GBV, femicide, jobs, universal basic income grant, and health justice. But the importance of highlighting how all of these issues are very interconnected.
I think it all links to a point that John T made at the end around capitalism. As, you know, there's these catchphrases. Is capitalism stupid? And it is, actually. But we can have a long conversation about it. But the core thing and the core thread, which is a painful thread, but could also be a positive one, is money. And what money can do and what money can prevent. And what's particularly important, Koketso, for us to think about is that, and when we're looking at policy interventions, implementations, and even the promises that political parties are making, is that these promises are done in piecemeal, individualistic ways. So what happens is that I end up making a decision around what's my affiliation and understanding in relation to land and housing, and I'll make that decision in that way, without thinking about what the decision I make in relation to whoever I vote for in terms of land has a direct implication to even, for example, the amount of land that's available to build new schools. Right? The decision that I make in relation to voting for a political party that is driving the ramping up and corporatization of a public entity, which is ESCOM, has implications on right? So in essence, we really need to go back to remembering that life, building society, democracy, and existing is not an individualistic thing. Yes, I am a person in South Africa, but I form part of South Africa as a whole. And if a political party is proposing something, they need to be discussing me as a whole, not bits and pieces of me. Because you see, what capitalism does, the role of money, what it does is that it portions out particular things so that it can make money out of it. So education becomes one thing, electricity becomes one thing, land becomes one thing, me existing and being able to be safe becomes a separate thing in the corner. Why? So that the arm of capitalism can benefit and make money out of it. The moment it is the human who needs to exist and survive and coexist with the world, it then becomes a problem for capitalism. How can it make money from a whole entity?
Yeah. I want to, with the time that we have left, we need to shift to what happens post the 29th of May. We are going to vote. Notwithstanding all the issues that we've raised, that we've highlighted, notwithstanding the people's demands versus what is contained in political parties, a political party, a individual possibly, will be victorious. A collective will be victorious, if you will, once we speak to the question of coalitions. And maybe coming back to you, Robin, staying with the issue of money in politics, what we've ascertained so far is that the people are not at the table in determining policy. They're not.
Not at all.
And we've seen the role of capital through funding. It's a given that there's an influence on policy. So those policies exist. And we're going into the 7th administration. The responsibility that we have as a people in holding the elected to account on the question of money and politics.
It's a very difficult difficult question, and I think I want to make my comments really following on what Kia has already brought to the table. There's a reason why when we talk about sort of the anecdote to capitalism in the very handy catchphrase of workers of the world unite, Kia has put out the fact that the operation of money in politics is effectively to work on the maxim of profit over people. So it puts people in silos, puts them in particular areas, specifically so that you do not band together and continue to rally against a framework that will have you believe that where you are living, where you are working, this is all you can be. And if we look post the 29th of May, as we look, as you said, at the 7th Parliament and a new administration, I think what we should be rallying around when it comes to money in politics is that we should continue to apply pressure around a stricture that allows you to operate in these silos. So we need to continue to see people coming together on the point of, for example, education and what that means for the young black child living in South Africa who will have to grow up in this perpetual situation that says you are nothing and you mean nothing. That is why you can have people who are protesting in Fort Main Road after 30 years and are still asking, in fact, for their basic needs as human beings. You shouldn't have to demand those things. Those things should be given to you. And I think because we are purposefully excluded from the table, part of our conversation post the 29th of May, to something that Kia said earlier, maybe it isn't even a table that we need anymore. We should take away the power that the table represents for the people already sitting there and rather put ourselves around that table and dictate then what the conversation should be like.
Andile Zulu from AIDC, on the question of energy, earlier on you spoke of how most political parties support the unbundling of ESCOM, and depending on who those political parties are, what we could possibly see post the 29th of May is a continued unbundling of ESCOM. But the question still remains around not only accessibility to electricity, but affordable electricity, and more people being connected to the grid. Again, moving forward, we are now post the 29th of May. What needs to be done? What is our responsibility as the electorate in holding those in power, in governance, to account?
I think a central thing is to kind of return to an appreciation of public goods, to say that certain things should not be commodified if they are needed by everyone. And so that then means trying to find platforms of engagement where you as a community member or someone a part of an organization or some kind of collective, you are able to look at a piece of legislation like the Electricity Amendment Act, maybe find an energy expert, maybe find an academic, maybe find organizations like the ones that are gathered here today, and ask yourself, in whose interests is this working in? This unbundling, for example. So we talked about access. One of the things that unbundling is going to entail is what we call cost-reflective tariffs, which means tariffs that are going to reflect the full cost of producing electricity, which is likely to mean that it's going to be more expensive for the rest of us as years go by. Because remember, a private enterprise must maximize profits and decrease costs. And so they're not going to invest in something like electricity unless there are assurances that there's going to be returns on their investments, profits on their investments. So you have to ask yourself, this free basic electricity program, go to your municipality and say, I am a household that earns this much. I've heard about this free basic electricity program. I qualify it. I deserve to be registered, and I deserve to get this service. So what it means that communities and individuals, collectives and organizations must find ways to get information from government and then ask themselves, is this in my interests, or is this in interests of people who are more powerful, who are more wealthy, who are not necessarily concerned about what is good for the public overall. And you can kind of think of it as the fight for ESCOM as a public good is a return to taxes over tariffs. Instead of increasing tariffs and pushing the cost onto us as consumers, we should increase taxes. and tax those who are able to pay so that we all can collectively benefit. But that's only possible if we're able to get access to the information and find those who can help us educate each other, and then we're able to hold the powerful to account.
Yeah, thank you very much. Nongedo Madubedube from Equal Education. What I'm looking forward to your answering this question purely because on the one hand, as you said, as Equal Education, you work majority with young people. And the demands that you spoke to earlier on are from young people. And so, without being corny and talking about, young people are the future, but what excites me and that I've seen in the country over the past couple of years is the elevation and the voice of young people. And so I'm very interested in how, as young people intend post the 29th of May to hold those in government to account and in turn making sure that they are heard.
Three things, again, that are going to happen. The first...
You specialize in three things, ne? You think in threes.
I am a qualified witch. I can only work in threes. The first thing is that we must insist on better leadership inside of our parliament. It's unjust that the EFF has only attended 63% of their meetings between 2019 and 2024. You've only got one job. Go there. The second thing that we want to make sure, and these young people at Equal Education have said since last year, building up democracy education, trying to figure out the answers to these questions, is that we're in the business of building youth power beyond the ballot. We understand ourselves as a critical part of civil society, of the social justice sector in South Africa and of our communities. And what we're interested in, and reminding our peers and parents that can vote and our siblings, is that democracy isn't just what happens on the 29th. It is a build-up. This is part of the reason. This is democracy in action, participatory, and even on the other side. So go to Parliament because we've now elected you to be there. The other thing that needs to happen is that, please, Nkosiyam, can our parents, our teachers, people of the Tripod Alliance give us a break? The trade unions cannot continue, and so-called progressive federations continue to run the electoral machine of the ANC without critical questions. No more clean slates. We need a leadership that is going to work. Now, as it demands, can go, comrades. The first is that we insist the Department of Basic Education, supported by everyone listening and the citizens of South Africa, make sure that we keep the timelines and implement them of the norms and standards for school infrastructure. Government can't have a blank check of when they will eradicate plain pit latrines in schools. The second thing is that we want to make sure that National Treasury understands that they are not a super ministry. The presidency, the Department of Basic Education, must ask back for that money that has been taken in the last financial year. Screw the projections of the MTBPS too. Easy. What needs to happen is that you bring the money back into the system and you help them match inflation at least to make sure that we can feed children in schools, we can fix their classrooms. We cannot continue to have children in 2024 learning under trees. The last two, I'm nearly done. We must promulgate a regulation, a law for the right to read for meaning. Otherwise, the system continues to perpetuate. There's a very deep inequality in our country. South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. It is frightening. And we aren't the future, we are the now. And this is how we're showing leadership. The last story of the demands, I'm done. Please, please, may the South Africans support us. We must publicly launch this long-awaited tool that is meant to monitor the building and fixing and maintenance of schools in South Africa. We need some kind of mechanism to keep implementing agents, private actors in our system accountable. Manla.
Thank you very much, Nongedo. And I must apologize on her behalf for that moment there. Of course, I mean, one celebrates the energy, and I love it. To our listeners, just jump on that. John T, again, this remains one of the more painful issues in our country. And as you mentioned earlier on, land and housing very much a springboard to all the other issues. It has a direct impact when you have or do not have land or housing. It has a direct impact on all the other facets of one's life. And so when it comes to holding those in government to account, as Ndufunukwazi, or even through the demands of the people, what is the intention post the 29th of May?
Yeah, I think the thing about land and housing is that it's both a problem and an opportunity. And if you get fixated on the problem, you're obviously never going to lift your head up and see what opportunities exist. So there's land available. Land is available to develop. There's creative and innovative ways to develop affordable housing in well-located areas through the state, through the private sector, both of them together. Who cares? You know, what we need is implementation. What we need is a track record to show that there is political will to do something that can start. And we're talking 30 years now to start to reverse the legacy of spatial apartheid. 30 years in, not one affordable housing in the inner city of Cape Town. That is a massive indictment on our democracy. And if that is an indictment of what our ability is, I think let's be optimistic about it and say that the sky is the limit. Because if we're stuck in the problems, as I said, we're just going to be, it's a downward spiral. So land is available, resources are available, private sector must come with money, there is an appetite, there is a creative willingness to do something that has a meaningful impact on people's housing and, as you say, springboard to other access rights.
Thank you very much. We'll take a quick break and then get your final thoughts, final word as we conclude our special broadcast. There is a meeting point on SAFM, 8 minutes to 10.
Here, there, and everywhere. SAFM 105 FM in Mokopane.
Mamkide, I heard Rand Water talking on the radio about how dangerous it is for people to encroach on their pipeline servitude.
Yes, those high-pressure Rand Water pipelines are under the ground distributing megaliters of water. When people build on top of the pipeline, Rand Water is unable to conduct maintenance on the pipeline, which has a negative impact on water provision. Pipelines can burst without warning. People could get seriously injured or worse.
Yes, people can die from a bursting pipe. That is why people need to understand that Rand Water servitude is where a Rand Water pipeline is located. If we build our houses or businesses on a Rand Water servitude, then we are encroaching on that servitude. They say if communities want to know whether they've encroached over servitudes, they should look for the Rand Water beacons.
The beacons indicate the presence of Rand Water pipelines under the ground. They're rectangular, made of concrete, are painted either white or blue, and have the Rand Water logo on them.
Let's take a walk around our area to see if there are any Rand Water beacons so that we can also tell the neighbors.
Rand Water, celebrating 120 years of existence and still finding new ways to provide clean, portable bulk water.
Buying a new TV? You'll need a paid-up TV license. Need to check your balance? No sweat at all. You just SMS your ID or TV license account number to 44210 for fast, effective balance inquiries. Secure your legal viewing, fast and simple. Standard SMS rates will be charged. Terms and conditions apply. TV licenses. Pay yours. Make a difference.
The SABC Fortune Combo radio stations, which includes SAFM, Lotus FM, and Radio 2000, seek the services of a freelance graphic designer who will collaborate with cross-functional teams to create visually compelling assets that align with our receptive brand identities and resonate with our target audiences. The minimum requirements for the position are a bachelor's degree or diploma in graphic design, visual art, or related field, 2 to 4 years proven experience as a graphic designer with a strong portfolio showcasing a range of design projects. All interested candidates should submit their CVs and portfolio of evidence to vacancy at safm.co.za. Application closed on the 26th of May 2024. For more detailed info, visit www.safm.co.za or follow us on our social media pages at SAFM Radio. SAFM, leading the conversation.
Stand by.
The Meeting Point, Wednesdays and Thursdays, 8 to 10 p.m. Only on SAFM. Koketso Sachane on SAFM.
4 minutes to 10, 4 minutes before the latest news at 10 with Greg Host and Oliver Dixon on the other side of 10. We conclude this year's special broadcast, the People's Analysis of Political Party Manifestos. And I want to bring it back to where we started with Kamohetse Sipato of My Vote Counts. Kamo, this is the start of a journey, not only in being able to elevate the voices of the people around their demands in relation to political party manifestos, but most importantly, the role that as citizens we need to play post the 29th of May. And I want to go back to what you said earlier on, that it is not all doom and gloom. If anything, while noting the challenges that we have in the country, it is an opportunity. It is very much a democracy that is maturing. And for the democracy to further mature, there is the role that we need to play as citizens. And I want to give you the last word on this one, very briefly, in speaking to our responsibilities post the 29th of May.
Our biggest responsibility, in short, is to actually participate and take part. What we've found and what we've seen, and a lot of my comrades can even corroborate that, is there's a fear and hopelessness that is transformed into, okay, so tell me what I should do. And that's the problem. So democracy is not elections. Our democracy is not the 29th of May. Our democracy is what we're doing now, and is what we're doing tomorrow and the following days. And that's what we need to remember. The other thing that we need to remember is, if we're accepting that democracy and exercising and enjoying it is an everyday thing, then we need to start taking part and figuring out what do we do to change the system to benefit us as people. We are not going to be able to say to folks, whether it's in civil society or it's any other sector of society, to say, this is the clear-cut thing that is going to be the silver bullet after the 29th of May. No such thing exists. The only thing that exists is citizens taking part and owning their democracy. And we can do that by engaging, being part of debates, being a part of conversations like this, and something someone said around constant collective action. We need to constantly organize, mobilize, and continue to demand for the things that we want till we are able to not get a seat at the table, but get to a point where we develop the kind of furniture we want. People, citizens, let's take part and not wait for someone to tell us who to vote for or what to do.
Thank you very much. That is where we conclude our broadcast. Thank you very much to our guests. Firstly, Kamohetse Sipato of My Vote Counts. Thank you. Thanks to Robin Pasensi of My Vote Counts, Andile Zulu of AIDC, Nongleto Madubedube of Equal Education, John T. Koga of Ndifunu Kwazi, and in the previous hour also acknowledging Yako Wolofse of AIDC, Kelly Housen of Universal Basic Income Coalition, as well as Wikanyo Moloto of My Vote Counts. That is where we conclude this special broadcast of the Meeting Point. Go out and find out a bit more about the People's Analysis of Political Party Manifestos, and also to go back to what Kamohetse was saying, the responsibility is on us post the 29th of May. It does not end with us going to the voting station, but rather playing a role as citizens of this country in determining and fighting for the country that we want. Thank you very much. This is where we conclude. Thank you very much to the team, to the technical team that had our backs during this broadcast. Really appreciate it. And those manning the cameras via the YouTube streams and everything, I really appreciate it. And to the core Meeting Point team, Kamohetse, we do have Kamohetse. Kamohelo rather, in the team. Thank you to you as well, to Leseho, to Lilford and Tawana. Have a good night. Thank you.